Just 48 hours after a federal appeals court refused to reinstate his immigration order, President Donald Trump hinted he'd be challenging that ruling, perhaps with a new order.
You spoke about you were going to win this court battle against the immigration and travel ban.
We'll win that battle.
You also talked about
the unfortunate part is it takes time statutorily, so it takes a little time. We'll win that battle, but we also have a lot of other options, including just filing a brand new order on Monday.
Are you planning to do that? Is that your plan?
Could very well be, but I like to keep you, I'd like to surprise you.
So what does that mean for so many families? Let's bring in David Cole, National Legal Director at the ACLU. David, good day to you.
Thanks for having me.
You just heard Trump say he has, quote, a lot of other options, but what are they? I mean, how far can he pursue this?
Well, one option would be to rescind the order. It's an order that doesn't further national security, that has upset the plans of many people who've been fully and clearly vetted, and which violates the Establishment Clause because it targets Muslims and favors Christians. So I think the best option would be to admit defeat, but I don't see the president doing that.
Well, supporters of the ban argue that this three-judge panel basically took a constitutionally granted national security duty out of the president's hands. Does that argument have any merit?
I don't think so. I mean, the court recognized that there is a role for national security, but the government wasn't able to cite a single piece of evidence that supported the need for this. We've been vetting people very carefully for a long time. This affects people who've been already cleared. There was no evidence that a single person from the countries that have been banned has engaged in a terrorist act against us. And essentially, the national security establishment has come out and said it's a bad idea. Everyone from Dick Cheney to John Yoo, who wrote the torture memos under George Bush, to Michael Hayden, who was George Bush's CIA and NSA chief, have said this doesn't further national security. So what the court said is, look, you're harming people's lives, many people's lives, and there's no evidence that furthers national security, and you're violating fundamental constitutional principles of equality and non-establishment.
Were you able to provide evidence, or can you provide evidence that it does harm national security? And there's another question, too. Is there a way, a chance that they could refine it and make it so narrow that it would then be okay? Can you see that happening?
Well, we'll see. If he comes out with a new order, we'll look at it, and if it looks like it's singling out Muslims or treating people differently based upon their religious convictions, which is what he promised to do during the campaign, what he said he was doing the day he issued this order. If he continues to do that, it's unconstitutional, and we'll be back in court challenging that as well.
You mentioned the exchange with some of the attorneys. I want to play the exchange from the Trump administration lawyers and the 9th District Court judges. Let's take a listen.
The district court asks the representative of the Department of Justice, how many federal offenses have we had being committed by people who came in with visas from these countries? The answer was there haven't been any.
Yes, Your Honor. These proceedings have been moving quite fast, and we're doing the best we can.
What's your take on the performance of the Justice Department attorneys? I mean, were they prepared enough? If they would have done something differently, would the outcome not have been the same?
I think the answer to that question was zero. And so instead of saying zero, he said we're not prepared, or we haven't had enough time. But they could look from now till the judgment day, and what they would find is that there has not been a single terrorist offense committed by a foreign national from the countries that have been subjected to the ban. This was not a national security executive order. It was an executive order that was designed to play to President Trump's base by targeting Muslims because they're Muslims. And if there's one thing you can't do under our Constitution and the Establishment Clause is you can't single out particular religions with a broad brush and disfavor them just because they're a particular religion.
David, what about the concern about future attacks? I mean, obviously, I know that these 7 countries, Trump talks a lot about the fact that the Obama administration had paid close attention to these 7 countries. Is there a concern, or is there any, I guess, thread of validity to you in this argument?
Well, look, there's always a concern about terrorist attacks and national security, and we have in place procedures that ensure that the people who come in are cleared because we determine that there isn't a national security. Are you at peace with the vetting process? There's so many people who are saying, oh, but the vetting process isn't good enough, so we're almost essentially letting in people who, we don't trust the system. What's your response to that? look, we've been using this vetting process for 15 years since 9/11. There hasn't been a single person from any of these countries who has committed a terrorist attack. That's a pretty good record from my standpoint.
All right, David Cole, National Legal Director at the ACLU. Thank you for your time on this Saturday.
Thanks for having me.